Hi everyone, welcome to the 4x4 Fab Shop, and today we're going to look at MIG welding with hardwire and with flux core. And we're going to do that on a 110 MIG welder, similar to what you'd be using whether you're getting it from Lowe's, Harbor Freight, or just a general 110 welder. Alright, so some have an advantage and some do not. We'll go through some of those. We'll do a couple test welds. We'll do a couple section cuts, kind of let you see the difference in them, and we'll talk a little bit about some of the safety gear that would be beneficial for you to have. So let's check out the wire. What we have here is two spools of 030 wire. One is going to be an inner shield or flux core, and one is just a hard wire. Obviously this one will require use of gas. We'll use a C25 gas, and the advantage of the flux core is it doesn't require any gas. And I would be curious to know in your comments if you're welding with a flux core or if you're planning on welding with a gas. All right, so please leave that in the comments for me. So we're going to be welding with this 3/16 material, and it's a little bit thick for the 110 welder. We're going to be on a high end of this. Now I have already taken off this mill scale. Anytime you're welding, you want to get down to bright metal. So I've taken it off on the bottoms and on the base so that when we weld our T-joint, we go into the root, we're not welding onto mill scale. All right, and I even have a flat piece here. Now the welder we're going to be using is an older Lincoln SP125. I think they've got the 140s out now, and we typically will run gas with this. But we're going to switch it over to the 30 thou wire. Right now we're running 23. We're going to switch this over and then get a direct comparison: 30 thou hard wire, 30 thou flux core. And we're going to try to use the settings that they put on these lids the best we can. You'll already see that when they're calling out flux core, they're giving you some kind of settings all the way out to 5/16. Now they're calling out these settings for a 35 thou wire. We picked a 30 so that we're running equal on the hard wire and on the flux core. Right, so when we run up to the 12 gauge settings, we'll see what the differences are. Alright, so first we're going to start with the flux core, the inner shield. Typically on flux core wires, they're going to call for DCEN. DC, electrode negative. Electrode negative meaning what comes out of the gun will be your negative and your ground will be your positive. For normal MIG welding, you'll see here that this is for the gun, you're positive, and your ground is negative. So for flux core, you'll want to switch that. We'll have to switch the rollers. I'll show you on here, the rollers are a little different. Typically the rollers are knurled for flux core. So you'll see on your feed rollers, but right here, like this one is stamped 030 or 035. And on this side, it's stamped 023. So we need to switch this over to the 030 side. I'm going to back off the tension because we're going to reset the tension. And when you use this wire, be careful so you don't let it totally unspool. It comes unspooled very quickly. And that flux core wire sometimes will want to break, so just when you think you have it, it'll break on you. And if it does unspool a little bit, just try to wind it back on there nicely. Just like that. So we're going to try to feed it through. Obviously you don't want to be changing the polarity with the machine on. And it'll just jump across and go right in. Sometimes it won't. So we'll just put just a little tension on it. We just want just enough for it to feed. So when I set tension with the flux core, just a little bit of tension, it'll stop. And the reason for that is this wire has a flux in the center of it. If you squeeze too tight on those rollers, you'll crush the wire. Okay, so we're going to use these 30 thousandths tips for this 30 thousandths wire. Now these are from Radnor. Typically Lincoln is usually sold at like Lowe's and a few other places. Now all your big welding supplies will sell Lincolns, Millers. If you're at Harbor Freight, they sell all this stuff as well. And we'll just slide that over. And that's what your handy pliers are for. The very front of it here is for the tips. The end of it here is to clean the nozzles out if you're using gas. And then you can actually tighten up the nozzle if you're using gas and cut the wire. Now, since we're running flux, they make these little tips like this to take the place of a typical tip for gas. Since we're running flux core, we don't need this tip for gas. This one just screws on just to protect all the components. So we're using 30 thousandths settings. Right now we have 30 thousandths flux core, not 35. We're going to go down here for 12 gauge. It's 105 thousandths thick. It's calling for a 35 thousandths flux core to be at G3, so it's just a good place to start. So on this Lincoln, we're going to go G and 3, and that's just a good spot to start at. Alright, so a couple things that I always wear. Hair is getting pretty valuable nowadays as I get older, so a cover for that. And you'll see why when we run in the flux core especially. A respirator is a very good thing. I really like this one. It's got that lock on it. Makes it nice to tighten up. And then as I find as I get older, the readers themselves, they work nice. You can get cheater lenses for the helmets. But I found that these blue blockers really work nice when you're looking at the arc. And then lastly, a good auto darkening helmet. So I use this Selstrom. Works really nice. You can buy the Harbor Freight one or whatever. But even if you don't spend a lot of money on a welder, spend a little bit of money on a hood. Get one that's got one of these auto darkening lenses in here that you can actually set for different type of welding. Alright, so let's gear up. Alright, so that's the first pass. You can see with flux core, there's a lot of slag on it. It leaves a lot of debris. So that's the flux removing all the contamination out of the air and shielding the metal as it goes down. So you'll need a chipping hammer. And if you let this cool, it comes off much easier. Or if you use an actual like wire wheel on a grinder, makes it much nicer. Alright, so that's just standard flux core. So let's simulate outdoors a little bit. We're going to turn on a fan, just blow it across to Now, I didn't see any issues with that. And truthfully, I'm used to being a little closer to that with running solid wire and gas. So I'm always trying to shove that wire in a little bit more. But just like outside, if you have a breeze going, it doesn't affect the flux core at all. So that's one of the big advantages of welding with the flux core. If you're welding outside, you don't have to worry about the breeze taking away any of your shielding. One thing I would suggest is some kind of anti-spatter, especially if you're using flux core. You can get these anti-spatter sprays, say that fast a couple times, anti-spatter sprays. And what that'll help with, all these little BBs are left on the part. So let's see the difference. Alright, so you can see with just a little bit of that spray how many BBs are stuck to it out here versus all of them out here. I don't know if that's going to be easy for you to see or not, but it makes it much easier for cleanup. Just a little bit on there and it cleans off so much better. So there's our wire, and remember we're running gas on this, so we'll need this nozzle. So that's the other part of what these pliers do. So if you got any kind of slag in there, right, you can use an anti-spatter spray inside of here as well. Now they also make this gel that you can use on the other ones as well. You just run it in there. Works good to, you can use that on your flux core as well. It just keeps the little BBs and the goo off the very tip. Put a little kink in here about 2 inches away. You want to set the tension so that it'll feed. So you'll have a little more tension on this than you will with the flux core. There you go, it's feeding about 2 inches away. We're going to call that good. To our chart, 30 thou wire, it says J 5.5. And we're going to go into the beginning part of J and 5.5. Now these charts are pretty handy. They're on most machines. There's a lot of good information in here. If you goes over your polarity, goes over consumables, right? Different feed rollers. This is the one I was telling you about that you can get for the flux core that are knurled or grooved. This is an older machine, but they put this information on a lot of the newer ones as well. Alright, so we've switched over to the hard wire. I'm going to lay a bead down of this hard wire. Now this is hard wire with C25 gas. And before we start welding, let's turn our gas on. And I'm going to run around 15 to 20 CFH on gas. See, it goes down there. If you're losing shielding, you can always go up. Otherwise, you're just using gas. So if you have hard wire with gas, you'll have a regulator. They got this style, and there's one where you float a bubble. I prefer the other one, but these are what comes with most of them. Same 30 thousandths diameter. Okay, so you can see a little difference. I had to tighten up a feed roller on this one to try to get it balanced out. But you can see just a clear difference in the welds themselves. Cleanup is much better with the gas. You don't have all the splatter. But I want to show you one of the really big advantages of the flux core over the gas. So we're going to simulate the same outdoor air condition. We'll see how that works. the weld was not getting good coverage. Got a hanger there on the very end, because you can see the big pit from the underside. The molten pool had a big pit in it, so when I stopped, it built up over it, and you can see the big void that's under there, and that's from losing the shielding from the gas. So we're going to section a couple of these welds. We're just going to cut them in our fine slugger cold saw. Okay, so they're polished. I've got some etching on them, and we'll find out here in a few minutes how the welds look. All right, so I sectioned the part, polished it, and put a little developer on it, a little etch. Trick we learned from watching welding tips and tricks. A lot of good information on there as well. But you can see on the hardwire side, looks like I got some lack of fusion there at the in the root. And this is the flux core side. Maybe a little bit there also, so a little technique I need to work on. But overall, I think they both did a pretty good job. So there's the hardwire MIG side, and there's the flux core MIG side. All right, I should have used some of the anti-spatter spray on that. But otherwise, I don't think either weld's very horrible, other than that lack of fusion in the very root. So I usually try to, as I come in, push the wire right into the root and come out. Looks like I need to spend a little bit more time in the root of it when I'm welding. All right, but that's where something like this works good. Cut it, polish it, and I put it on a disc sander, some 240 emery, then I use some wet dry with some WD-40. So you can use just about any kind of etch, navel jelly or easy off. Like I said, I've learned this from watching welding tips and tricks, so I'll give them all the credit in the world. Just to show a little difference, the weld profile is just a little bit different on a flux core versus hardwire, but I think both are good welds. They just have different purposes. All right, so that was using hardwire with C25 gas and some flux core rod, both 30,000s, both out of a 110 welder, so they'll both do it. It struggles a little bit with that thick of wire. It really likes that 23 thousandths wire. Even knowing the guides and everything say 25, typically it's 23.023. Right, so you can do a lot of work with the 110 MIG. You can't get some of the penetration that you can with 220. It likes a little more voltage, which is all by your wire feed. Right, so when you're looking at welding, it's really about what project are you wanting to do. If you're welding indoors, I prefer C25 gas, hardwire. I think cleanup's much easier. Overall, I think it's a much cleaner process. I prefer it. But if I had to weld outside, flux core is a great alternative. I don't have to worry about, is there going to be a breeze come by and take away my shielding, and now I got to grind out the weld, right? So I hope that helped you. So what we'll do is, I'll see you on this video with some tips and tricks on welding itself. Till then, this is 4x4 Fab Shop, and I'll see you in the next video.